You're listening to ArTEEtude, a podcast with artists created and produced by Detlef Schlich, a visual artist and ritual designer, living and loving in West Cork, and best known for his essay about the cause and effect of shamanism, art and digital culture. Working in the field of performance, photography, painting, sound, installations, and film, he will dive and discover with us and a weekly creative guest into the unknown and exciting deep ocean of the creative mind.
This is Detlef Schlich, and today we dive into the exciting ocean of the creative mind with Robert Artaine. I must say, we had a very difficult time behind us, and this podcast is as well a special one. It's very sensitive, and we speak about very hard subject. We had actually already yesterday a whole session gone. That means 2 hours speaking about the subject, and then everything disappeared. I had corrupted files. I was getting interrupted, and I couldn't get the files anymore, so we decided we have to do that again. We're gonna do that again today. First of all, I say welcome, Robert Artaine. Hi, Robert.
Hello, Detlef. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. If you guys see this podcast on YouTube next week on Sunday as well at 10 o'clock, you won't see the face of Robert because we decided that we're not showing his real identity in order to keep his privacy a little bit safer, because the subject is very hot and tricky, difficult. Robert used to be a fellow. He used to live in the institutions in Ireland in the 60s, and that's actually subject of the first part. He's as well performance. He is performance artist, drawer, painter, whatever, artist in general as well. That saves his life. In the first part, now we will speak about actually the subject of identity. If you survive in institutions like this, Robert, hey, was it right how I introduce you, or
Well, it starts in the 50s actually, but yes.
okay.
It's we're talking basically. I use my name Robert Artaine, as in one of the institutions that I've been in, which is what you might call the Reform Institution. If we got a brief history on this, the institutions, the industrial schools, were open by the British government in Ireland, and Irish families suffered the consequences of being sent to these institutions, and with the help of the Roman Catholic Church. They were kept open in the Free State in 1933. The Irish government decided to keep them open. Why? Nobody knows. Why would they do this? When the declaration of the Irish government was equality for all children, meaning families, obviously. We're all supposed to have this freedom and the equality of that freedom. But for some cunning reason, this was not to be. It might have been a free state, but it was far from being free for the families of Irish poverty in the 50s,
Yes,
in the
yes,
60s and the 70s.
Sure.
And so, when children were sent to these institutions, you've got to remember they were taken from their families. They were placed into these institutions by the Irish courts. There was no crimes committed. You can't. Children who were sent to these places were obviously not going to school. There was a lot of problems with these poor families, but the government not willing to talk. The government are not willing to talk about this.
Yes.
About their failings on their political status, and how the poverty was rampant in Ireland. Now, saying this, I don't care what they say, there was plenty of money to be made by the state and by the Catholic Church. Because there's going to be, looking at these institutions, there's going to be no wages paid, there's going to be no welfare paid, there's not going to be any massive health bills, there's going to be nothing. So much for a free state. We have generations of families who were sent to these institutions before Ireland kept them open, and afterwards. My generation, my family, I've had many generations of my own family within the walls of these institutions. Now, these institutions were first opened around the 18th, 19th century. The industrial age was over in the 19th century. It was finished. So how can you, this is how neglectful it was for a government to call it the industrial schools. But mostly the church would call them orphanages. Now, the words orphanages would be used to collect donations. These donations were kindly paid by the tax-paid families of Ireland, who, by the love of God, they wanted to help the poor families who were unfortunate. They were unfortunate.
It was a time where state and church was not divided, wasn't it?
Exactly right.
So that shows already the danger if a state and church belongs together. They can get away with a lot of mischief, isn't it?
Well, when you think about it, it's even against their own scripture. What is of the laws of the land is the laws of the land. What is of God is of God. You know, and that's actually their scripture, but they didn't apply by that. But never mind. I'm not going to go into that kind of stuff.
Where is God? Yes.
Exactly. And there was no God in this at all whatsoever. I think he was a banker. You know.
So yeah. So that was you say in your case it was in the 50s, but it started already in the 30s. So that was already going 20 or 30 years. So an ongoing thing. It's quite. I say interesting. It sounds awful if I say interesting, but the interesting thing is that in the 50s or even in the 60s, we come later to that. The church could get away with that in Ireland. I mean, I wonder if this could happen nowadays again somehow. I mean, I doubt it. You know, I mean, for that, I'm quite happy that we have the European Union, even if there are some evil things in it as well. But could you imagine that things like this could happen? Say at the same time in France and in Germany.
Well, it was happening in what we call the civilized world. The Roman Catholic who travelled many different countries, you know. But I'd rather focus on Ireland, where, you know, there was this, the freedom. The supposed freedom. You don't know all this kind of. You got to remember, the Irish family were like mostly uneducated way back then. Sure. The greatest fear they had is of God.
Sure.
And sin. It was driven into the Irish family, and that, you know, they're worthless. You know, they're sinners. They're whatever. You know, and it's kind of this oppression that was constantly being put on top of families. And that the Catholic Church claimed that they could help forgive you for your sins, and there's penance, and it was a very confusing thing for a lot of families. You know, the great fear of punishment or hell and brimstone.
I would like to just, you know, I think that nobody can imagine how this can be for a young person. So you told me that how many people used to sleep in one room, for example. Can you please?
Well, you see, this is right. When you were taken to the courts, that was the day you lost your own identity, because you've been taken from your family, so your namesake is never there anymore. Your namesake is taken. You are sentenced by the courts to the institutions. Now, isn't it strange? The word orphan is to be father and motherless, but for a state to actually make that to take you from your family, that in itself, one has to just try and think about that for a moment. A child being taken away from their mother, from their father,
Yeah, and dear
from their
listeners,
brothers,
please don't forget
from their
that
sisters, from their uncles, from their aunts, from their grandparents, from their friends, even their friends outside. You know, you're stripped. Each of this is a layer of your life that you're supposed to be growing up in, that you're supposed to be feeling safe. It's been pulled away. You've been pulled away, peeled away from it. The mothers, if they're not married, would be sent into the Madeleine laundries, mother and baby homes. We've recently heard the stories of all of these places. They're all under the same roof. We've got to remember this, of the Catholic Church and the state itself. It was the dustbin of Irish politics, because it meant that these people would have to be looked after, jobs would have to be created, etc., etc. You know, that it was a government's job to provide jobs, to provide, you know, a safe country. It failed. It failed because everything's been hid.
Sorry about this. An attitude and an attitude as well. Sure.
So you see, the reason why they took your identity is because they did not want you to be found. And especially if families got into the institution and got the kids back, that was seen as a crime. You know, as a crime. And the children have done no wrong, and neither have the family done any wrong. You know,
I think, I think that I think everyone understands that this was very worse scenario, you know, and
I don't think people really actually do understand. You can't expect people
but go deeper into identity. I mean, what does that mean if your identity is getting stolen, you know, and as a young person, you know? What does it mean? What does it mean if you're 10 years, or how many years did you used to stay in institutions? How many institutions did you meet?
People were. This is what I'm saying. Babies were born in the institutions because of sin, the children of sin. Okay, and then they'd be taken from their mothers, never to be seen again by their mothers, who were very young. A lot of them were very young. And it was heartbreaking. You know, can you imagine ripping a baby away from a mother? Your baby she just gave birth to her son and daughter, or both, or whatever, and they're being taken away from their mother.
Sure. So,
you know, this is how horrific. This is barbaric. This is really barbaric politics, and they cannot be playing with this anymore. And then. You're grown up in the institutions, and all you know is a number. All you know is do what you're told or else. Do what you're told or else. And you have got no wages, you've got no, you've got no clothes, you've got nothing. And your families would be trying to send things into you because they feel like, you know, they wanted to send stuff to you. And that would be confiscated. There's no chance of you seeing any presents. You're not even entitled to your family to come and visit, your friends to come and visit, your mother, your father, your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents. Nobody is allowed to see you. You are cut off, and this is it.
Yes.
And this is what they don't understand is the children that were coming in each time were telling us the story. So we're reliving the stories of each child that came into the institution as fresh as it was. It's not just that we were put in there, locked up and hid. These children were constantly pouring in. They were pouring in the doors, you know, and the government were failing each and every one of us because they literally poured us in there. like water. Just pour them in there. Just get them in there.
Sure.
Get them out of the way.
Sure.
Get them off the streets. Get them in there. You know, and it was really shocking when you think of it. You know,
So you
that,
said
when you were in there, when you're actually in there, then you're being denied any communication. So you're gradually in time listening to the children coming in and their stories, and it's constantly awakening your own story of the of the parents going missing. You know, not going missing. Sorry, you're reliving the fact that you've been taken away from your parents, and you don't know where they are. You don't know where they are at all. Then you're going out to work, and you're working darn hard. You know, back-breaking work, constantly, from making rosary beads from 5 years of age, right up to, you know, doing the milking of the cows, to manufacturing goods, to repairing clothes, to laundry. The laundries were happening in the institutions as well as they were in the Madeleine laundries. The children were still doing.
So it was a money-making machine.
It wasn't just the Madeleine laundries. No, it was the children as well. And this is what's being kept quiet. The cultural abuse of children is the reason why the sexual, physical and emotional abuse took place. How in God's name could these things have taken, they could never have taken place if the actual setup of the Catholic Church and the state's institutions were not invented, or if they were dispersed because of times in the 30s. But these places were still running according to the 18th century when they first opened those doors, to the 1975 when they closed the doors on the industrial schools. They are now calling them residential institutions. That is bullshit, because residential means, like, if I think of something residential, I think of somewhere I've been paid to go to, you know. And if you I typed in my research residential, and it's always in the time when the government would start using this word residential. It took rules, it took laws in the door to call them industrial schools, and to pass those titles. To prevent the truth coming out, they called them residential schools. They were not residential. Residential schools came after 75, when there was no more work. Children didn't have to go to work. There's a big difference. And there's loads of money to be made. That's why the state and the church, especially the church, has billions. That's why they're extremely rich in land, property and coin. All donated by the Irish families who pay their taxes and give of their taxes to trust people who call themselves men and women of God, to look after these lovely little orphans, these orphans in the orphanages who've got no parents, who've got nobody. But nobody actually then realised that we were being pushed in there.
All right.
Yet we have parents. They could have helped those families. They could have helped those families. They could have got off and done the politics properly. You know, many other countries did their. How come every other country could do it? You know, even poor countries, they accomplished. But this is a really dark place where we are, and for what happened in these institutions, the brutality. These people who ran the institution also were not qualified as doctors, as nurses, as psychiatrists, as teachers, as whatever. They came from any neck of the woods. They could have even come from the prisons themselves. They were hired. This was the rockin' 50s, you know, and the twist 60s, the glamorous 70s, you know. And you know, if you look at if young people look at the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they have this glamorous feel about the history of the country they're in Ireland and in England. No. The reality was the false imprisonment of young children into institutions and forced to work for no wages. They did not even own the bed. They were humiliated if they pissed the bed or shit the bed or got sick. The stench. Now in Artaine, hundreds of beds. If you go onto YouTube, type in Robert Artaine, industrial schools were not schools. You will see by the images that were available on the Ryan Report and all over the internet, that how these beds were. They were like this since they opened, since right on the years up to 1975 when they closed. And Artaine actually closed in '69. And there was Upton, there was Letterfrack, Dangan. There's all these places. They're all similar. They're all squashed in. As many beds as they could squash in. And you're in that bed only for a few hours and back out again. Sometimes you're called out of that bed during the night for purposes that you should not be called out of your bed as a child. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. And, you know, it's horrific. The screaming in the night. The torture. It was torture. And I want people to try, you know, you could smell those hundreds and hundreds of beds in one dormitory. Just there's 5 dormitories, I think it was, in Artaine. And the stench in them of the fear of piss, blood, sweat, tears, sick, shit. It's all there. And you can wake up to every single morning.
You know what I would like to? I would like to end the first episode actually with this piss and with this smell and with this shit for the listeners. It doesn't have to be always comfortable, dear listeners, and I find this is a good end for the first episode, especially it's a Sunday morning where people can go to church or can listen to the podcast as well at 10 o'clock. So next morning is good. Next Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, you can listen to the second part. And I would like really to have you here again. You know, I mean, I feel sorry if somebody feels a little bit uncomfortable after this talk, but I think things like this, they have to be discussed as well, and there is discourse about it as well. So sure, you know, I think this podcast is going all over the world, and for some people it's very difficult to understand what was going on in Ireland and what is going on when church and state is not divided. I think this is a very crucial. Church and state has to be divided at all. I would say, dear listeners, on that note, I feel a little bit grumpy to advertise for my own podcast. I'm not gonna do that now, but you can find everything on ArTEEtude.com. I would say, dear guys, have a lovely day, and I hope I see you next week again. Bye. Bye, Rob. Thank you very much.
Listen to ArTEEtude, West
Thank
Cork's
you.
first art, fashion, and design podcast. ArTEEtude, never so close again. That was too close.